Video games get hyped to the moon and back, and as a result, there are many out there, ranging from the outright awful to the pretty good, that don't manage to fully capitalize on their lofty concepts. Whether it's mechanics that aren't taken far enough, a story that begs to be fleshed out, or simply ambitions that aren't supported by technology actually available, all of the following games fail to hit the mark. With that in mind, then, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 more video games that ruined their own potential. Number 10, Deus Ex Invisible War. Even if you've not played the original Deus Ex, you're probably aware of its status as one of the most influential and acclaimed PC games ever made. Well, this sequel promised even more choice than the original game, along with superior visuals and a continuation of the original game's plot, albeit with a new protagonist. Now, while it would be unfair to call Invisible War a bad game, because it absolutely isn't, but there's a reason why most people forget that it even exists, and that's because it never feels like anything more than a cheap imitation of the original. Yes, the emergent gameplay is satisfying on occasion, but the game is hampered by hilariously awful AI, scaled back customization elements despite the game promising more freedom, a dubious universal ammo system, smaller levels, and an overwhelming feeling that basically everything was dumbed down in order to appeal to a wider player base. In trying to rake in more sales though, Iron Storm ironically alienated those who made the original such a success, and had those very fans soon enough returning to the vastly superior original. Despite decent sales, the franchise evidently stopped being a priority after Invisible War, as the next game, Human Revolution, took another 8 years to reach gamers. Number 9, Back 4 Blood. Back 4 Blood was supposed to be the successor to Left 4 Dead, but in the end, it kinda just settled for scooping up its table scraps. The most recent game from Turtle Rock, this multiplayer shooter wore its inspirations on its sleeve. Here you played as one of 4 characters fighting back against hordes of the undead and special infected in order to get from safe room to safe room. And on paper, it has everything that made Left 4 Dead so damn addictive, but in practice, things were just a little bit off. The attention to detail just wasn't there this time around, and as such, the combat wasn't as impactful or as fluid as it could have been, weapon handling didn't feel satisfying, while the difficulty balance often made runs feel unfair and joyless. Throw on top of this, strange character progression systems, and Back 4 Blood, while not a completely terrible game by any means, failed to take the torch from its zombie predecessor. Number 8, Red Steel. Red Steel was by far one of the most hyped launch titles for the Nintendo Wii, with the company promising that the unique motion controls for both gameplay and sword fighting would pretty much revolutionize how we play games. However, the game meant to be the ultimate advertisement for the Wiimote, well, wasn't. Yes, in addition to some disappointingly drab graphics, laughably poor voice acting, and a duff enemy AI, Red Steel's motion controls were inconsistent and clunky at best, making even moving around a chore, while the sword fighting lacked the finesse and satisfying feel that had been promised. In addition to this, the game doesn't even have the courtesy to be a short blast. It's around 8 to 10 hours long, but given how exhaustingly tedious the majority of the action is, it's likely that many never even made it to the finish line. In 2010, Ubisoft Paris did release a vastly superior sequel though, which essentially played how the original should have. Number 7, GTA Online. Rockstar promised that GTA Online would be a significant expansion of GTA 4's solid deathmatch style, allowing San Andreas to become their playground, introducing leveling up, missions, and best of all, cooperative heists to net awesome booty. Even ignoring the massive server issues which plagued GTA Online upon launch, it just felt incredibly piecemeal for the longest time, and still kinda does. The missions were insanely repetitive for one, enough that there wasn't much incentive to keep playing to increase your rank. And then there's the heists, the most hyped up part of GTA Online, which were delayed repeatedly until finally releasing in March, a whole 17 months after the game first launched. By which time, most players had just lost patience with Rockstar and moved on to other games. Oh, and while the heists were initially promoted with huge 8-player cops and robbers type gameplay, this was ultimately scaled back to just 4 players, further compounding the crushing disappointment that a lot of gamers felt. Throw in additions that made the use of microtransaction shark cards virtually necessary to keep playing, and the whole thing still has drawbacks to this day. Yeah, you can have a lot of fun in GTA Online, but there's always the sense that this thing just could have been more. Number 6, Spore. Spore was built up to be the god game to end all god games, allowing the player to nurture an organism from the most basic essence of life to building an entire civilization in the far reaches of space. And who wouldn't want to play that? Well, as it turned out, Spore was so empty and down on its promises that it's hard to believe that it wasn't made by Peter Molyneux. The final game was essentially 4 loosely connected and incredibly short minigames and a half-decent space sim, which had clearly been dumbed down to appeal to a wider player base, but in turn resulted in a game that wasn't really worth playing for more than a few hours. In addition, a lot of the previously advertised features were cut from the final product, yet despite all of this, the game somehow scooped a mind-boggling 84 on Metacritic, which was incredibly disconnected from the player consensus. Number 5, the Dark Pictures Anthology. For a time, everyone thought that Supermassive Games were going to lead a revolution for interactive movie-like video games. Their PlayStation horror exclusive, Until Dawn, grabbed the attention of fans around the world as being a tight, charismatic love letter to the genre. People loved it, I loved it, and we all eagerly awaited what the developers would do next. And that project was even more ambitious. An anthology series featuring shorter standalone games of the same quality as Until Dawn, each bringing a new cast of characters, utilizing a different horror subgenre, and tweaking the gameplay with new gimmicks. On paper, the Dark Pictures Anthology sounded awesome, but the tight turnaround of the releases and their shorter experimental nature didn't quite mesh. At the time of recording, 3 of the 8 planned installments have released, and none have quite made the impact of Until Dawn. Now, they've not been bad games. Some, like House of Ashes, have been particularly enjoyable, but others like Man of Medan failed to leave much of an impression at all. Whether the series is struggling under the pressure of the turnaround or what, the Dark Pictures Anthology has not yet earned its spot as being Until Dawn's true successor. Let's just hope then that the upcoming The Quarry can do that instead. Number 4, Brink. Brink was sold as a revolutionary first-person shooter with a heavy focus on parkour movement mechanics, taking place on the unique setting of a giant floating city known as the Ark. An impressive marketing campaign did a terrific job selling it as the next big shooter at the time. And to be fair, Brink wasn't a bad game by any means, but rather a decidedly average one, and one that didn't appear to maintain the attention of most gamers for more than a week or so. Yes, the smart player movement system was fun, yet not as innovative as advertised. And when the rest of the game felt so ordinary, it ultimately couldn't do all that much to impress. The AI was also a huge problem. Enemies put up a courageous fight while any bots in your team were more of a hindrance than a help. And there just wasn't enough to the game outside of its gimmick to distinguish it from anything else at the time. Without more depth and more personality, Brink was always destined to be quickly forgotten. Number 3, Final Fantasy XIII. The first Final Fantasy game on the PS3 was always going to get a ton of people excited, and from the fluid gameplay and gorgeous graphics shown off pre-release, there was no reason not to expect a major return to form after several underwhelming entries. Square Enix just seemed to lose their enthusiasm for the series after Final Fantasy X, and because 13 is yet another hilarious, overwrought, often incomprehensible story featuring inane, unlikable characters, they didn't seem to get the passion back with this one. Yes, the game looks lovely and the combat still holds up pretty well, but a massive chunk of the title is essentially one long linear corridor, which feels completely at odds with everything the Final Fantasy franchise has ever been about. As such, 13 is one of the few Final Fantasy titles to be a one and done, in that there's very little incentive to return to it once you've done your self-imposed duty as a fan by steamrolling through it one time. Number 2, Resident Evil 3 Remake. Resident Evil was riding high again following the double whammy of Resident Evil 7 and the remake of 2. The stink of 6 was well and truly gone, and fans had no reason to doubt that the remake of Resi 3 was going to continue that winning streak. But while nowhere near the complete disaster of some games in the series, Resi 3 did underwhelm in a big way. That's because it felt more like an expansion of the second game than a full release in its own right. An already incredibly short game, the remake feels even leaner, cutting out certain elements and speeding through its own campaign without giving anything the chance to breathe. And if there was one Resi game that could have been expanded on, it was 3. Seeing more of Raccoon City in the midst of chaos could have been amazing, as could have a next-gen version of Nemesis stalking you through the streets. And these potential expansion points weren't just wishful thinking on the part of fans, as Resi 2 changed and bolstered so much, including Mr. X, that fans were expecting Resi 3 to do the same. Sadly, it just wasn't interested in doing that, and as such didn't live up to the potential of what a remake could have been. Number 1. Halo Infinite. Halo Infinite has some of the most compelling gameplay in the entire franchise. The way it plays, its art style, the whole presentation is a return to form. The foundations are fit enough to support a truly incredible game. The issue is, that's all the game kinda currently is though, a foundation for something else. Despite being delayed a whole year, Halo Infinite still feels unfinished in both its campaign and multiplayer, with key modes not even being present at launch that you'd expect from this series. Infinite is a live service, and you can tell Microsoft have used that as an excuse to deliver a basic version of Halo that will hopefully be completed with time. With an insulting grind in the multiplayer, basic matchmaking features being nowhere to be seen, and an over-reliance on the storefront, Microsoft took the wrong lessons from other free-to-play titles and put them in their marquee release. And look, I'm sure that in a few years this will be one of the best Halo games on the market, but right now, it's all just unfulfilled potential. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. That got really sour towards the end. I'm sorry for that. I should have had maybe more jokes in there. Either way though, let me know what you think about this list in the comments. And while you're down there, could you please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.